Thank you, Imran, for your opening remarks, and welcome everybody to BoF Crossroads. ضيوفنا الكرام شرفتونا بحضوركم. إن شاء الله يعجبكم برنامج اليوم ويكون محور فعال وناتج بيننا. Today I'll be talking about the Global South. What is unique about the Global South, and what dynamics do these countries within this vast region share with each other? So there are 5 key dynamics that I would like to dive into today that define the Global South. The first dynamic that we see is rapid growth of the footwear and apparel markets. So when we look at the Global South countries, we see that the projected growth, and that is a CAGR for the upcoming 4 years, is 1.5% compared to the Global North growth rate of 0.4%. So that's over 3 times the growth rate of the Global North. And you can see that while the US, the UK, and Germany are larger markets than many in the Global South, there's higher projected growth for the countries of the Global South. And what does this mean for brands and retail looking not only to enter, but to grow in the region? So first, due to a larger proportion of informal retail and unbranded segments of the fashion market, there is an opportunity to think way beyond flagships, to have more flexible rollouts, more mobile units that supplement the idea of a flagship store, as is often the model of a solitary flagship store in Global North markets. Second, we find that income disparities require dual strategies. Of course, income disparities exist everywhere, across Global North markets as well, but more stark income disparities in the Global South mean that many brands need to think about their assortments and their product and pricing for a wider range of customer. And third, while there is this stark income inequality in many of the countries, the middle class is also growing. And what this means is that there's a unique middle market opportunity across many of the Global South countries. But in such a fragmented market, this means that desirability and storytelling becomes immensely even more important to compete in that mid-market. Our second key dynamic is the young population of the Global South. So the Global South's median age is 32 years old. With the Global North, the median age is 44 years old. We talk a lot about Gen Alpha and Gen Z, but really the implications here are about how to build that brand loyalty for the long term and starting quite early. And some of the ways to do that, our research shows that to engage younger customers, real life experiences matter a lot more, which might sound counterintuitive because we all know Gen Z and Gen Alpha as the digitally native generations, but they highly value experiences that are not only real life and immersive, but where they can be participants, where it can be a two-way dialogue as opposed to a one-way experience. Second, as many of you here in this room will know, key opinion leaders, influencers, and content creators across the Global South are incredibly important. But also what's changing is the perceived authenticity of working and of collaborating with key opinion leaders. For that, what brands and retailers can do is identify the often unique and niche subcultures that exist in these different Global South countries and to target them in specific. And so, that might be skateboarders in Nigeria or sand dune surfers in Dubai. And it is about going more niche to speak to these particular subcultures as opposed to painting with a broad brush. And third, we find that for younger customers, digital spaces are becoming more and more important. And by digital spaces, I don't necessarily mean only conventional social media, but spaces that are newly emerging where the customer has more control on shaping the narrative. So one example of that is the technical menswear community on Reddit, for example. If you are a fan of brands like Arc'teryx, The North Face, Stone Island, CP Company, Reddit has a huge and burgeoning forum where all of these fans go and dispute and talk about the qualities of the brand. And the reason that's so powerful is because this dialogue is led by the customers themselves, as opposed to the brand dictating the dialogue. Our third key dynamic is rising cities. And this dynamic is particular to urbanization. And so what we mean by that is urbanization is the potential to urbanize is quite high in the global south. So the global north already has on average an urbanization rate of 80%. And as you can see, some of the global south countries are also at that urbanization rate. But in countries like China, Indonesia, Thailand, India, and Kenya, there is still immense high growth potential. And where we see this happening is particularly in tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So for a country like Indonesia, 34% of the digital economy is actually driving, the growth is actually coming from tier 2 and tier 3 cities. So the digital economy in terms of the income that brings in, 34% of that is from tier 2 and tier 3 cities. For Thailand, the GDP growth of tier 2 and tier 3 cities is growing at 15 times the rate of Bangkok. And so what does this mean, the rise of tier 2 and tier 3 cities, for brands and retailers looking to expand in the global south? So number one, there needs to be a larger willingness and investment in terms of planning for uncertainty. So changing regulations, emerging infrastructure, and even at times political instability and risk means that brands and retailers need to plan for that uncertainty. So this is about budgeting and planning in the early stages. Second, it means that phased rollouts become a very, very viable way to maneuver the shifting infrastructure. So starting small, starting flexible before going in with major flagships. And third, a mobile-first strategy is increasingly important. So we've talked quite a bit about digital, but with mobile, the difference here is that in the global south, more personalized applications are on the rise. And so to work with local developers and designers on what that interface could look like within each global south country is becoming more and more important. And our fourth dynamic has to do with supply chain hubs. So you cannot talk about the global south without talking about its immense supply power to the rest of the world in terms of textile and clothing. So specifically, when you look at Bangladesh, Vietnam, and India, they are major exporters, bigger than markets like the US, UK, and Japan. Now, of course, the ongoing conversation and backs and forths, even as of this morning, on tariffs brings a lot of uncertainty into the projected and future growth rate. However, what is indisputable is that the sheer scale and size of these markets as exporters is here to stay. Whether those trade routes change, whether new hubs emerge as hubs for re-export because of tariff and tax benefits, that is still an open question. And what that really means is, when we talk about sustainability in fashion as a big goal, there is no sustainable future for the fashion industry without the global south. It is impossible to get there without targeting and progressing, the conditions and the sustainability targets in terms of production in the countries where the clothing is actually produced. And this is becoming more and more important as brand reputations become more linked to the way that workers are treated and also to sustainability credentials from customers and across the industry. In terms of innovation, what we really see as the next step is for brands to move beyond investing in compliance to actually investing in the infrastructure. So that means clean energy, circularity, and resilience, which is really investing in low disruption of these supply chains as well for the next decade. Now, our last key dynamic here is a bit of a softer one, but also a stronger one. It is about cultural export and soft power. And so while the other metrics that I have shared with you have been somewhat more direct to share because they're about one neat industry, fashion and apparel and shoes, with creativity and craft as cultural export, you have many cultural industries that you could look at for measure. Here we have chosen two key industries to focus on. So one is handicrafts. And you see that in India at $4.3 billion, there is still a lot of growth, projected at 7% in the upcoming 8 years. In Vietnam, starting from a base of 3.5 billion, a growth of around 9%. These are huge growth rates. And This includes things like resins, pieces of upholstery, buttons, all these different things that go into furniture, textiles, clothing, and beyond. And this is cultural export. This is cultural imprint. We see another industry, which is quite an exciting one, music. Over the past decade, there has been more than a 900% increase in terms of streams of Latin music on Spotify. In 2024, Afrobeats was the fastest growing genre of music. And so the cultural and soft power of these two cultures, both of Latin music and of Afrobeats, that goes beyond the ability to simply measure in numbers and has a soft power impact that I think we will be really seeing over the next few years. And what does that mean for brands and retailers thinking about the Global South? So, first, local brands are already using these deep cultural insights and homegrown talent to grow. It's their MO. It's what they're good at. And in recent years, they are becoming more bold. They're getting more government investment. They're getting more customer interest. So they will only be growing. What global brands can do to be part of the story is to take a long-term view on these investments and to take long-term bets. Two examples that I really like that we've got here, in terms of pictures. So one is the Dior Chanakya School collaboration. So Dior has worked with the Chanakya School in India on many of its collections, most recently the Spring-Summer 25 runway, for an installation for its runway. And that is an ongoing collaboration where there is an imprint and a cultural export in terms of Indian craft. The second one is Dazed Mina, which is a publication actually based out of Dubai, and it is a partnership by ITP Media Group and Dazed Global. And there you see that the cultural license that has been given to the team working there is resonating way beyond the Middle East with extremely, extremely creative editorials. And now with these 5 key shared dynamics that I've shared, you have rapid growth of the fashion markets. You have a youth-led boom in terms of the retail market. You have rising cities and urbanization, the fact that the Global South is indispensable for the global supply chain, and lastly, the rising cultural power of different industries in the Global South. These are going to shape the dynamics of the next decade in the Global South, but there is one question that remains, which is, who are the brands and the retail projects and retail groups that are going to take the boldest bets in terms of cultural investment? Thank you.